collecting linguistic data, because my team works in natural language processing, and we have some projects dealing with indigenous indigenous languages, and so my talk will be about some ethical aspects about collecting data from these indigenous communities, right? So this is a representation because I will be giving a dualistic view to many things, because I had, or my team actually, but I will say I had this Western-centric approach to the task. And then, with the passing of years, I discovered that we were assuming many things that in other parts of the world are not considered like that, or are not accepted like that, right? So this is just a 15-minute description of the things that we have learned that have to be taken into account when dealing with indigenous communities. So this beautiful AI-generated picture shows this idea of the dualism, you know, the yin and the yang, and in every black thing you have some shades of white and the opposite. And what I want to emphasize here is the blue way, the yellow path in the middle that represents the idea that usually this is called the golden mean. Usually virtue lies in the middle way. This was already posed by Aristotle, which is I think the third or fourth time that we hear his name in this forum, but it's also part of the Buddhism, for example. But I have remarked the often because there is also the fallacy that some people say, okay, so let's go always for the middle path. And in some cases, the one view or the other is usually the right way to go. So it's not always that you have to stay in the middle, but sometimes. But I will try not to decide which of the two views is the right one. I will just explain them to you, and you may decide. And so regarding languages of the world, there are estimated more than 7,000. 4,000 of them are indigenous. A lot of them are endangered. And a few of them have institutional support. And the rate is quite dramatic, the rate of extinction, because it's around 20 languages per year right now, and it is estimated by UNESCO that it will be 40 by the end of the century. This is a very famous, at least in my area, a very famous graph by a paper by Yoshi and some colleagues in 2020, and it represents the amount of data for 2,000 languages in the world, right? So on the one hand, it's representing the amount of labeled data, and there is also the amount of unlabeled data. Notice that the scale is logarithmic here, and most of the languages, like 90-something%, they belong to the green area there to your left. They are called the left behinds. So as you can see, for most of the languages, there is barely no labeled or unlabeled data. So we have a problem, we have a situation here. Because yesterday, for example, in the panel, it was said that machine translation works so well, it's incredible. And every one of you who is using that for languages such as Spanish, Chinese, German, English, Catalan, and so on, it works very well. But you need to know that there are thousands of languages in the world which have no support. So this is not for everyone. Not everyone needed a machine translation system, for example, will find it for their own language, because most of the languages belong to this area. And what happens? That LLMs, that is what we usually use to translate nowadays, LLMs are trained by this massive task of predicting the next token, next token, next token prediction, and so on. And for that, they need usually billions or trillions of tokens and so on. And this is not available for the languages in the green area. So what can we do? This is just a brief description of what we are doing. LLMs are so smart. They are winning math Olympics, computer programming Olympics, and so on. So couldn't they study a language in the same way as a human as we could do by, for example, consulting grammar books and dictionaries and so on? So this is kind of feasible because there are thousands of languages which have grammar books, which have been written by field linguists for the last decades or centuries. But that would be not enough. You probably know that just by having a good grammar book or a textbook, you will never manage to develop a good proficiency of the language. But then the second step will be that the LLM embodied in a robot or in a device, an application in the mobile phone or something, it will learn by immersion, going to the streets, interacting with the people, and probably actively contributing to the community, and so on. So indigenous people, there is no formal definition for this, and UNESCO has some glossary which identifies these features about what means to be an indigenous, like self-identification as such, and historical continuity with some pre-colonial period, strong links to the territories and different social, economic, and political systems. For this talk, what is relevant is that usually there is some intergenerational transmission of an ancestral language that defines collective identity and preserves their worldview. And another important thing is that these languages are often connected to people which belong to vulnerable communities. So that means that ethics has to be taken into account since the very beginning. And the basic thing is that this lemma here, this motto of nothing about them without them, this is more or less assumed today as the right way to proceed. And there are some principles like ethics by design provided or suggested in many institutions. For example, in the European Union, it is commonly used today for all the projects. That means that ethics is introduced in the project from the very beginning, even when you start writing your proposal, and it's not a byproduct, as it was usually done in the past. Okay, I write my research proposal or I write my paper, and then I add the ethics stuff at the very end, because there is something that has to be there. Ethics by design considers ethical principles as something that has to be embedded into every single stage of the research process. Okay, so I will give some ideas, as I was saying before, and some opposing ideas so that you can see that there are different viewpoints for many things. For example, we may say, okay, indigenous is a right term to refer to these people. Actually, it comes from Latin, indigena, and not from India or something like that. But on the other hand, there are people that consider that indigenous has been imposed from the outside and it's controversial. There are some alternatives, such as First Nations, Aboriginal, original peoples, and so on. But at the end of the day, many people say, okay, why don't you simply use the name of the specific community you are referring to? And there are literally thousands of indigenous communities in the world. I just randomly picked up one per continent, and probably these are well known to you. Okay, so what about having this term, having one single term to refer to all the indigenous communities? It has some advantages, but on the other hand, indigenous people are deeply diverse. And especially if you compare indigenous communities in the global north and in the global south. And I read this book last year. It blew my mind, right? Because I was feeling comfortable in my Western vision about the topic. This book is written by a Maori professor at a university in New Zealand. And she presents a number of ideas that are quite interesting for us, given our usually Western-centric view of the things. So research. Oh, research is such a novel thing that we are doing. I'm a researcher, so I'm a researcher, so I can be so proud because there is nothing wrong on research. So the book starts by saying that research is considered a dirty word in the minds of many colonized people. Because in the past, or maybe even today, Western institutions were there, they studied that people, and they built a comprehensive view of the communities. And so everyone could knew about these people and what they are doing and what they believe or how they consider what life is. But this is not really true. What usually happened is that Western institutions produced a biased and incomplete vision of what these people, the others, were doing. But research could be used in order to improve the conditions, which are often, as I said before, not the best ones for these peoples, right? Okay, but in the past, and again, probably in the present as well, many researchers went there, they did the research, probably to get a promotion or to get more money, to become a professor, a full professor or something like that. And then when they went back, local people continued living in poverty. So there was no impact coming from the research into the lives of the people. Knowledge is something good. It's something that we all want to know, something that we all want to have and should be preserved. But on the other hand, the right to know must be questioned when it overrides the sovereignty of the communities. And the book ends also, or also includes this mention of the word post-colonialism that is used. Okay, we are living in a post-colonial era. Everything is not like in the past, this extractive approach that we had in the past. So it's like a new beginning. And the book says that post-colonialism is actually a concept that is hiding an existing colonialism that is somehow still alive. So I will just show you why we are interested or what we are learning about this, because we have some projects dealing with indigenous languages. So in this case, this is a project in which we are translating a very well-known data set for machine translation into 6 Mayan languages. This is funded by Google and a translation company in the United States, Masterwork, and in collaboration with institutions on site in Guatemala, like Fundación Proyecto Lingüístico Francisco Marroquín. So this is a picture of a workshop that we had 2-3 months ago. My colleague Andres is this one here with hat, and we were supervising the translators, and they started with the translation of the data set. And this is a picture of my team also, because we are also digitizing a number of grammar books and dictionaries for those Mayan languages. So another claim, linguistic data is a universal heritage. So language belongs to everyone because we are humans, and it's like a heritage of the whole humanity, and it should remain open and for the benefit of everyone. Another view is that communities are the ones that should keep full sovereignty and control over the language resources, because we have to be really careful here, because data acquisition can be used or considered as a new form of extractive colonialism. This is also another paper that for me was, I was really happy to find it, by Manuel Maher and some colleagues. And because I was assuming for more than 20 years that machine translation is good in order to revitalize, to preserve, to save all these endangered languages, right? But then if you read the interview, they interviewed a number of Latin American researchers belonging to some indigenous communities, and actually it's the opposite. Or they have this potential issue about machine translation doing some bad things. For example, imposing an unwanted standard, because at least in the old days, before LLMs, you had to choose a variety of the language in order to create a machine translation for that, and even increased Western cultural influence, because if now you can translate everything coming from the metropole or from the dominant language of the dominant culture into the indigenous language, it can contribute to increase this influence from the outside. And machine translation, this is amazing. Some of them were worried that it could actually contribute to language extinction, because the young people, for example, that they usually speak Spanish or English or whatever, depending on the region, and they don't know too much about the indigenous language, And then if they have some content in the indigenous language and they may decide and they can translate it into Spanish or English or whatever, why would they want to read it in the original language? So United Nations is aware of this. Actually, 20 years ago, many countries, including ours here in Spain, right? They signed this Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, stating that they have total control over their cultural heritage, including linguistic resources. But there are a number of things here that come into conflict: governance, centralization, data persistence. We may consider that, okay, put the linguistic data into open repositories, so there is some universal access to them. This sounds good. But at the same time, some other people consider that only centralization protects sovereignty. That if the data is only in one single location, is how communities may modify or even cancel, erase, or delete all the data. Actually, this is the archive of the indigenous languages of Latin America, and it's a repository in which the information can only be there, and it cannot be copied or forked in other repositories, for example. Wow, copyright. Well, copyright, there is a long discussion here about copyright, but Creative Commons licenses, they seem quite interesting and so beautiful, and they are really useful for many things, right? But our view of the copyright, of the ownership of data and things, is not always aligned with those of indigenous communities. And actually, in many cases, it's totally incompatible. And we need legal frameworks coming from the communities that are aligned with their worldviews. And this is the Kaitia-Kitanga license, for example, by the Maori people in New Zealand. And they say, okay, open access, or open source, that sounds good, but we want to have total control over the data. And so this license is whatever you want to do with the data, you have to ask us about that. And persistence of the data. If someday, hopefully not, but the community disappears, we want the data to be there as a universal heritage of humanity or something like that. It seems a good idea. Actually, there are protocols like IFS or Filecoin that allow you to have data there for centuries. Or the Arctic War Archive, you know about this, they have these reels, you can store data there, and it will live in the Arctic, in an island in the north of Norway, for 1,000 years at least. So that sounds interesting, but we should keep in mind that language destiny belongs to the speakers. So if the community don't want the to be available forever, because in some cases there is sacred knowledge that some sacred knowledge that they don't want to be available to everyone. Okay, and there is a discussion here. It's been here forever. Anthropologists and linguists, they know much about that because it may be destroyed. But this is what happens. This is the fire in the National Museum of Brazil, like 10 years ago, and 80% of the collection, including lots of resources from indigenous people, were fired and destroyed forever, right? So we want this in spite of the community's opinion or whatever, so it's an open debate about that. And then they say, okay, we have to ask the communities, and let's agree on that. Actually, I agree on that. But who are the communities? Who decides? Because in our Western view, we usually say that there is some institution that is responsible for the decision. But on the other hand, languages and governance, for example, in indigenous communities, can be plural and much more complex. There are multiple entities that may have different roles and responsibilities. So asking the community about what they want to do with the data is not always as simple as going to some door and knocking on the door and making the question. And so, to finish, again, given these two views, opposing views, we could say, going to the ends, to the very ends, that AI is one of the strongest hope for preservation of the linguistic heritage and cultural diversity in the world. But at the same time, or on the other hand, as an opposing idea, we may say that AI may be a massive threat for indigenous communities. So remember what I said in the beginning. Usually a good starting point is the yellow path, the middle path, and we can start the discussion from that point, and probably we will get to interesting things. And to finish, this is a quote that I like by Xian Biao. He's a Chinese anthropologist, and this was in an interview in a Spanish newspaper I read like 2 days before, El País, right? And he was saying something really interesting that connects with some of the topics that were discussed yesterday, that the danger is not that AI is too strong. The danger is that we as humans are much like it. And he said that in the process of this AI progress, we are somehow losing our humanity. And so my final thinking here is that we from the Western world can provide a lot of things that may be beneficial or not. I've been trying to provide you the two views of that. But our technological progress can be really useful for some tasks for these indigenous people. So from the global north, we help them with that. But we should keep in mind that the opposite is probably more needed, that maybe we need some help from these indigenous communities because they still hold this ancestral worldview and human essence that probably is what our technological society needs most today. Right? So I'm finishing here, but one last thing is that this is they asked me for a title, so I didn't think twice, and I said, okay, ethics of collecting linguistic data from indigenous people. But then I found this from, like, it reminds me of this idea of extracting, taking knowledge. And so I decided to change the title. I will do that at the very end. So instead of collecting linguistic data from, it would have been better to say with indigenous people, right? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Juan Antonio. Questions?
Thank you for the talk. It really made me think about a lot of things. Not the first time that I hear the word Western, excluding Central and South America. I'm guessing that's the use of the word usually, or I don't know. Because I don't know, many countries there actually have a lifestyle closer to those in Europe than, I don't know, the global. I don't know if everyone accepts.
Yeah, no, it's the same as indigenous. Yeah. Actually, I should have said that I will be using indigenous because it's quite accepted, but obviously there is some discussion. And the same thing about Western, what is the Western world? Yeah. Then they move to the global north and the global south, which is not exactly also because there is no like the equator line, like exactly. No global, and so it's difficult.
Yeah, and South America is more to the east than the whole of North America. Yeah, you know that.
We need some labels, but labeling is part of the problem. We need that as humans because we need to put names, to give names to things. But as soon as we do that, we usually make it more solid than it should deserve, right? So I understand that Western probably is not.
You give an example of the Maori people wanting to have the rights of the database of their own language. But I'm guessing they previously had a centralized, I don't know, representing person to you, but I don't think all communities have that, right? So,
yeah. There are like many different communities, and they have different worldviews, and usually some people, for example, the old people have different ideas than the young people. So
okay.
So it's complex, like everyone involving humans. So I wasn't here to provide a solution. I'm just to say that that we have, as you were saying, we have to think twice about everything, and probably we will not get to the optimal, but we should try.
Finally, I'm sorry, since they can choose if to erase the database, for example, then they can they can choose who learns a language and who doesn't, for example. I mean, they could have ownership about the very knowledge of the language. But is that a right that is natural to have over one's language? I don't know, to be honest.
I don't
if
want
the language is a human heritage, then maybe it should be very much public.
Yeah, but there is one viewpoint is that language is human heritage.
Yeah.
And actually it connects with this idea that we are all the same, we're in the same boat. We all seek for happiness and we don't like suffering and everything, so we are much more connected, right? But on the other hand, there is this idea about that the resources belong to the communities, right? And in some cases, for example, there is some traditional knowledge labels, which is an institution, a foundation, which is proposing a number of labels to annotate all the resources coming from indigenous communities, not only language, but even things in nature like seeds and things like that. So they are considering also protecting things like seeds, for example, because there is this flower that has grown here for the last 20 centuries, right? And they want to keep that flower there because they consider that they don't want it to become like a global flower that everyone is doing. Because we usually here in the Western world, we have this idea of taking resources from there and then selling them as something exotic, and then it's everywhere, and you go through the streets and in tourism shops and shops for tourists and things like that, and you find a lot of things that, and somehow it's disturbing the original message or purpose of that knowledge or flower or resource or whatever. So, yeah, but the topic is, there is a lot of things that could be discussed about this, and there are always different viewpoints, and the idea is to at least find ourselves in the middle and then try to move to the ends, whatever it means.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Juan Antonio.
No pregunto.
Hi, Juan Antonio. Thanks for your speaking. Do you think AI can help to preserve or, in other ways, to destroy that minority languages? I mean, people helps AI to translate the languages they don't speak. But if we don't, as a human, speak that languages, probably it will disappear. What do you think about this?
Yeah. That I try to present this idea that AI, or for example, machine translation, may imply revitalization of a language, but on the other hand, it may completely make the language become.
And what do you
extinct.
think about that? If you had to decide to prognostic.
No, but probably we should go language per language, because it depends on who is developing the technology, how they are using that, and it's not, there is no single question, and sorry, but I will not take a specific position about that, yeah. But I think that with enough dedication, things can be done better. So one colleague of mine, well, she's working in Barcelona, but she was saying something like this, Cristina España, she was saying, we are always like including many languages in our papers. So my languages have been this, and without, or totally ignoring the reality of those languages and so on. So maybe if we become more conscious about that the languages that we are using, they are not something neutral or something, so there could be an impact of everything that we are doing. Remember that it was said yesterday, AI is not neutral. So if we consider that, probably we should think twice before including this or that language, or we will ask, or I don't know, right? But there are many things that can be done. And not simply downloading some data and doing some research and producing some models, or maybe we should ask before, I don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Juan Antonio.